Okay, in this lecture I'm going to talk about basic chemistry with respect to hormones. Now some of you have already freaked out on hearing the C word, chemistry, but don't freak out too much. I don't expect you to know, specific molecular groups or anything like that. I just want you to know the basics. So essentially you can categorize hormones as being either hydrophobic or hydrophilic. These are terms you've heard before in biology, whether you remember them or not, but they're very important terms for you to know. It'll affect medications that you give to your patients. You just have to know what these words mean. So hydrophobic means water-fearing. Hydrophilic means water-loving. So think about what kind of macromolecule or chemical would be hydrophobic. So the major types of macromolecules, at least for the purposes of this discussion, would be carbs, like sugars, proteins, and lipids, aka fats. So of that group, which do you anticipate would be hydrophobic? Hopefully you intuitively knew that lipids or fats are hydrophobic. They do not play well with water. So for example, if you're mixing vinegar, which is a water substance, with oil, which is of course a fat, put the two together and they do not like to mix, right? If you're making salad dressing. So when you hear hydrophobic, I want you to think fats, lipids, fats. Really what we're talking about here are cholesterols, with respect to hormones anyways. The type of fat we used, or lipids I should say, that we use to build hormones is cholesterol. Another term you've heard in the media instead of cholesterol would be steroids. So anytime you've heard about an athlete taking a steroid, what the media is talking about is an athlete taking a natural hormone that's produced by the human body, but he or she is injecting excess amounts of it, to give them extra features, bigger muscle mass, whatever. So steroids are just hormones that are cholesterol based, and in the body they naturally are produced, but as an athlete you can go and get some synthetic ones to give you extra advantage over your peers. All right, so we're talking about lipid-soluble molecules. Cholesterol is a lipid, so it's only going to play well with other lipids. So when you think about how this hormone, this type of hormone, will interact with a cell, the cell is surrounded by, whatever target cell you're talking about, is surrounded by a cell membrane. Think back to your bio classes. Cell membranes are lipids. They're made out of phospholipids. So lipids play well with lipids. So a hydrophobic hormone will be able to jump right inside of a cell. It'll be able to go straight through the cell membrane, right inside the cell, and act on the inside of the cell through an intracellular receptor. That means inside the cell receptor. Typically, hydrophobic hormones will turn on genes in the nucleus. So they will cause a cell to do something by actually turning on genes. Your hydrophobic hormones are your sex steroids, like testosterone, estrogen, etc., and your corticosteroids, like cortisol. Hydrophilic hormones, as the name suggests, are water-loving. They are made out of basically protein. And because they have a charge, they're polar, they interact well with water, and they do not interact well with lipids. So hydrophilic, water-loving. Because they are water-soluble, they are therefore lipid-insoluble. So hydrophilic hormones do not play well with the cell membrane of a cell. In fact, they can't get past that barrier because they like water and the barrier is fat. Cell membranes are lipid-based. So in order for a hydrophilic hormone to act on a target cell, they have to touch a receptor on the surface of the cell. Hydrophilic hormones never get inside of cells. They just touch the surface of a cell on a receptor, and then the receptor triggers some kind of effect in the cell. Examples of hydrophilic hormones would be oxytocin and ADH from your posterior pituitary, pretty much all of the hormones of the hypothalamus, and most of the hormones of your anterior pituitary are hydrophilic protein-based hormones. And there's others as well across the body. Okay, so knowing that you've got hydrophobic hormones, which remember are lipid hormones, and hydrophilic hormones, which remember are protein hormones, how they're transported in your blood is going to vary. Hydrophilic hormones have no problem being transported in the blood. Blood is mostly water, they're water-loving, they will just dissolve in your plasma. Hydrophobic hormones, on the other hand, don't play well with blood. Remember, blood is mostly water, and they are hydrophobic, water-fearing. So those steroid or cholesterol-based hormones are going to have to be transported in the blood by what are called transport proteins. They literally have to hitch a ride on a transport protein in order to get them around in the blood. Anytime a hormone, a hydrophobic hormone, is hitching a ride, so to speak, it's called bound because it's literally attached to a transport protein. And that extends their half-life. Basically, half-life refers to how long will a hormone last in the body. And if they are bound, they might last, several weeks. But in order to get out of the blood and onto whatever the target cell is, they have to become unbound. They have to get off their ride, and that allows them to leave the blood and reach the target cell. Once they are unbound, they don't have a very long, it's not really a lifespan because they're not alive, but we still call it a half-life. They have a very short period of time on which they are effective. So once a hormone, a hydrophobic hormone, is unbound, once it detaches from its transport protein, it can only have a couple of minutes to find its target cell and have any effect. All right, a related topic would be receptors. Where do you need receptors for which type of hormone? Well, there's two major kinds of receptors. Intracellular are inside the cell, and membrane-bound are on the surface of the cell. So think about an intracellular receptor. What will it respond to? What type of hormone could get straight through the membrane and into the cell? Remember that the membrane is lipid-based, so what kind of hormone could get through a lipid? Another lipid, right? A hydrophobic hormone could get through the cell membrane and act on an intracellular receptor. Membrane-bound receptors are on the surface. They're out on the plasma membrane. Those will be receptors for hydrophilic hormones. Those are those protein-based polar hormones. So here we've got an artist illustration of a blood vessel. That's what that pink thing down the screen is. And inside of that blood vessel, we've got some hormones. Off to the right, we have a cell. The cell's membrane is the blue, kind of the two lines of blue would represent the cell membrane of our target cell. All right, so let's focus first on the blue triangles. The blue triangles are hydrophobic hormones. In other words, they are steroids or cholesterols. Hydrophobic means water-fearing, which means they don't do well just dissolved in the plasma. So note that several of the blue triangles are bound. They are bound to a transport protein. When the transport protein releases the hydrophobic hormone, they have a very short half-life, and if they're lucky, they will leave the blood and go into the target cell. Now look at that blue triangle going into the target cell. Do you see it went straight inside of the cell? That's because it's a lipid and the membrane is phospholipid bilayer, and so it's able to go straight into the cell. And in fact, in this case, it went straight into the nucleus and had some effect on the DNA of that cell, activated some genes and got some kind of a response. Now let's look at the yellow square hormones. Those represent hydrophilic hormones. Hydrophilic are water-loving. They're protein-based hormones. Because they're water-loving, they can travel in the blood in plasma, and they can freely leave the blood and go over to the target cells. But once they're at a target cell, they've got a problem. They're hydrophilic, water-soluble, in other words, and they don't play well with the cell membrane. The plasma membrane, of course, is lipid-based. So hydrophilic hormones can never get inside of target cells. Instead, they will attach to the surface of the target cell to a protein membrane receptor. So a cell surface membrane receptor. All right, so intracellular receptors are inside of cells, and they're going to respond to hydrophobic hormones, because those are the only hormones that can get inside the cell. And their response will be some kind of activation of some gene along the DNA strands within the nucleus. Membrane-bound receptors are out on the cell membrane. They respond to hydrophilic hormones, which are unable to get through the phospholipid bilayer. And they, through a long chain of events that we don't need to get into, will have some effect on the physiology of the cell. Some kind of response will take place inside the cell.